Intention alone is not enough to transform reality. And because of that, most teachings on manifestation end too early. They tell you to set a vision, to imagine what you desire, to picture it clearly until you can almost sense it. And while that method is powerful, it remains unfinished. The quantum field does not respond to partial signals. It does not shift itself just because you visualized something once in your thoughts. At best, intention is the first ignition, a whisper into the field. But without the next stage, it stays suspended, ungrounded, floating in potential. The missing element is collapse, the instant when a possibility stops being a thought and becomes tangible. Without collapse, your desire never leaves the space of imagination. With collapse, it transforms into the version of reality you actually live. Quantum physics explains this with precision. Though in language, most teachings never touch it. Before observation, particles exist in what is called a superposition, countless potentials existing side by side. No single outcome chosen yet. But the instant an observer interacts, the waveform collapses and one version solidifies into reality. This is not theory. It is physics. And it mirrors the process of creation. You are surrounded by infinite expressions of yourself, the version who is prosperous, the version who is healed, the version who is adored, the version who is liberated. All of these timelines exist right now, suspended in superposition. Visualization alone keeps them floating. Collapse selects one. Collapse brings it from potential into manifestation. And here is where the paradox deepens. Most people never collapse the outcome they desire. They visualize. They speak affirmations. They declare wishes. But their identity, their emotions, their body remain aligned with the version of life they are trying to outgrow. So even as they imagine, they collapse the familiar. They collapse lack, fear, limitation because that is the frequency they embody most consistently. This is why so many people feel stuck in patterns of desire without realization. They are constantly collapsing realities, just not the ones they intend. Think about your own experience. How many times have you reached for something higher but felt the pull of your old narrative holding you back? You tell yourself this time it will be different. But beneath the words, your body repeats the same fear, the same hesitation, the same memory of failure. That is collapse happening in real time. The field listens not to what you declare once, but to what you embody every day. This is the unseen step no one talks about. Manifestation is not about sending out a hope. It is about embodying a frequency so completely that the field must align with it. Here's the piece most people overlook: if collapse is constant, how do you aim it toward what you truly desire? The answer isn't struggle. It's not about pushing harder, visualizing longer, or forcing belief. Collapse occurs naturally when there is coherence, coherence between mind, emotion, and body. Coherence between the energy you hold and the outcome you choose. When intention, emotion, and physiology unite, collapse becomes inevitable. The field cannot ignore a steady signal. The real question is not can I manifest this, but can I sustain the state long enough for the collapse to occur? This is why so many teachings feel incomplete. They give you half of the formula. They tell you to wish, to hope, to dream. But they never explain that without collapse, you are only rehearsing potential realities, not living them. And this is why people spend years repeating affirmations without true transformation. They never evolve beyond intention into embodiment. They never cross that invisible threshold where the field stops hearing their words and starts responding to their vibration. But wait until you see what happens when you do. When you move beyond imagining and fully collapse into the version of yourself that already possesses what you desire, that is when reality bends. Every tradition, ancient and modern, has pointed toward this truth. Mystics spoke of faith not as hoping, but as knowing. Neville Goddard said to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not as a brief act, but as a living state. Joe Dispenza teaches that when you embody a future emotion before it arrives, your body begins living that reality, and the field rearranges to reflect it. All of these insights converge on one point: collapse is not about wishing. It is about becoming, and becoming is always silent, always internal, always unseen by the world until the evidence appears. So here is the open loop left hanging in the air: if collapse is the missing link, and if it's the only step that transforms possibility into reality, then how do you practice it? How do you stop visualizing your dreams as distant and instead step into the version of existence where they already exist? The answer will require you to challenge the way you perceive manifestation itself. Because what you are about to learn is that collapse isn't something you do once. It's something you live. And once you understand how to live as the collapse, you'll never return to the old way of hoping again. Physics has a way of dissolving illusions. At its most fundamental level, reality does not behave as we assume. It doesn't unfold as a solid chain of events. Instead, it exists as probability, as waves of potential that crystallize only when observed. This is the essence of the wave function. Before observation, a particle is not here or there, not one thing or another, it is all possibilities suspended in superposition. But the instant it's observed, the wave collapses and one version emerges as the reality we experience. This process, known as wave function collapse, is happening constantly, whether we notice it or not. And here lies the profound connection. Manifestation operates by the exact same principle. Every desire you carry exists right now as a probability suspended in the field of infinite potential. Wealth, love, freedom, healing, all of them exist as alternate versions of your life, waiting in superposition. But unless you collapse into one of them, they remain possibilities never fully chosen. The act of collapse is not random, it is directed by alignment. Just as a measuring device in physics compels the wave into a defined state, your consciousness, when coherent, selects and stabilizes a version of reality. You are collapsing wave functions with every emotion you embody. This is why wishing alone is insufficient. Intention is like pointing toward a potential, acknowledging that it exists. Collapse is like entering it. It's the difference between watching endless doors appear in a corridor and actually walking through one. Until you decide, they all remain closed. And if you do not choose consciously, you collapse by default, often into the same predictable patterns your nervous system repeats daily. This is why so many people live out the same loops. Even as they dream of transformation, they are collapsing unconsciously, recreating the same emotional tones, thoughts, and expectations. And so the field reorganizes to mirror the same outcome again and again. The science of collapse also reveals why change can appear sudden. In physics, wave collapse happens instantly. A particle does not gradually become an electron here instead of there, it becomes it in a single pulse. Likewise, your life can appear to shift overnight. What looks like a sudden miracle is actually the rapid collapse of probabilities you've been resonating with for weeks, months, or even years. The evidence lags not because nothing was happening, but because coherence was forming silently until it reached critical mass. Then, without warning, reality pivots. But here's the unseen mystery: if collapse is constant, why don't people collapse into realities they truly crave? The missing element is energetic awareness. Collapse answers to the dominant signal. And for most people, that signal is scattered. They crave abundance but radiate scarcity. They long for love but vibrate fear. They imagine freedom but embody limitation. Their field becomes like a detuned radio broadcasting mixed frequencies. And so, the collapse defaults to the strongest, most habitual state, the one they unconsciously sustain. This is why the science of collapse is profound. It shows you that you are never failing to manifest, you are always manifesting what you embody most. Neuroscience mirrors this truth. When a thought fuses with emotion, neural pathways ignite and wire together. Over time, these circuits stabilize, and your brain favors them instinctively. This is collapse at the biological level. Your nervous system determines which probabilities feel most real, and your perception filters reality to confirm them. If your mind is trained in fear, you collapse fearful realities. If it's trained in expansion, you collapse infinite ones. The science could not be more precise. Your biology is the measuring device, your state of being is the frequency, and the field is the medium through which collapse unfolds. And here lies the paradox: collapse is inevitable. You cannot not collapse. Every breath, every emotion, every belief you sustain is solidifying some version of reality into existence. The question is never will it collapse, but what am I collapsing right now? This understanding is both humbling and liberating. It means you are not waiting for manifestation to work, it has always been working. The field is always listening. The collapse is always unfolding. The only variable is whether you are collapsing consciously or unconsciously. So let this question linger in your awareness like an open loop. If you are already collapsing wave functions with every thought and emotion, what would transform if you learned to collapse intentionally? What if you stopped defaulting to the same predictable outcomes and began selecting the reality where your desire already exists? The science confirms it is possible. The field is infinite. Collapse is continual. Which means the only boundary is the state you choose to embody. If the science of collapse reveals that you are constantly selecting a version of reality, the next question becomes inescapable: how do you choose differently? The answer is not in striving harder, chanting affirmations endlessly, or visualizing with greater force. The answer is identity. Collapse does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to who you are being. Until you shift the self you embody, you will continue to collapse the same version of life no matter how vividly you imagine another. This is why Neville Goddard's timeless message still resonates so deeply. You do not manifest what you desire, you manifest who you are. He urged his students not merely to imagine wishes but to inhabit the feeling of the wish fulfilled, to embody it, to become the version of self for whom that reality is already real. Joe Dispenza expresses this in scientific language. When your thoughts and emotions synchronize with a future possibility, your body begins to exist in that timeline as though it already has. Neuroplasticity encodes it. Hormones amplify it. The nervous system learns to stabilize it. And once your biology harmonizes in a new state, the field has no option but to reflect that coherence back to you. But here's the paradox few recognize: if you keep identifying with the outdated self, even while visualizing the new one, collapse reverts to the familiar. You cannot outthink identity. You cannot declare, "I am abundant," while feeling like someone stuck in lack and expect the field to rearrange. Collapse responds to alignment, not contradiction. This is why so many attempts at manifestation feel like friction. Intention whispers one thing, identity vibrates another, and the dominant frequency always prevails. Think of it this way. Identity is a tuning fork. Strike it, and it hums at a specific vibration. Place another tuning fork nearby, and it begins to resonate in harmony. Your embodied state is the fork, the quantum field is the space around it. Whatever signal you sustain consistently, the field mirrors. If you hold the frequency of limitation, the field echoes limitation. If you sustain abundance, the field amplifies abundance. Collapse is resonance in motion, and resonance is always defined by identity. So here's the interruption to your old pattern: you do not attract what you want, you collapse what you are. This is why chasing, pleading, and grasping never succeed, they emit frequencies of separation. The field translates them as incoherence. But when you live as if it is already done, when you no longer question if it will happen, collapse locks perfectly into place. The field has no resistance to coherence. It has no choice but to respond. So how do you embody the desired frequency? It begins in the body, not the mind. Your nervous system must learn what it feels like to already experience the reality you seek. This is why emotions are the language of creation. Thoughts without feeling are hollow signals. But when thought and emotion merge, the body begins to believe. Gratitude is one of the most powerful frequencies here because gratitude presupposes completion. When you feel grateful for something you have not yet seen, you teach the body that it is already real. That emotional signal rewires the brain, harmonizes the heart, and generates a coherent field. That coherence collapses probabilities. Story after story confirms this. Someone who lived years in financial scarcity finally decided to stop identifying as broke and began quietly embodying abundance. Nothing changed overnight, but internally the shift was transformational. They walked differently, breathed differently, made choices differently. Weeks later, opportunities appeared that had never seemed visible before. Friends said, "You seem different," without knowing why. The truth is that collapse had shifted because identity had shifted. And when identity transforms, the ripple is inevitable. But here's the curiosity loop that must remain open. What if embodying is not about forcing belief but about surrendering into alignment? What if the state is not something you create but something you allow? This flips the struggle upside down. Instead of straining to believe, you release the need to control. Instead of declaring the change, you live as though it has already unfolded. This is the silent power of embodiment. It requires no effort, only coherence. Science supports this at every level. When you consistently embody a new emotional frequency, synaptic pruning begins. Old circuits that no longer match your identity weaken and fade. Simultaneously, new neural connections strengthen, stabilizing the elevated self. This is biology collapsing probability. And because biology communicates with the field, reality reorganizes accordingly. Spiritually, traditions call this faith, assumption, or surrender. Scientifically, it is coherence and neuroplasticity. Both point to the same universal truth: embodiment is the mechanism of collapse. So, let me ask you directly, what reality are you embodying right now? Not what are you hoping for, but what are you living as if already true? Your answer to that question determines what collapses. And if you wish to shift that answer, the change does not demand effort, it demands identity. Once you enter the state where your desire already exists, the field cannot resist it. Collapse follows identity as surely as dawn follows night. Understanding collapse intellectually is not enough. Knowing that reality responds to identity is powerful, but unless you live that truth, it remains conceptual. Collapse must evolve from theory into practice. And embodiment requires consistency. Think of it as training awareness. You cannot expect mastery from a single practice. It is the daily, quiet discipline that builds transformation. These rituals are not dramatic. They are subtle anchors, small intentional acts that stabilize coherence until collapse becomes unavoidable. Breath is the first and simplest of these anchors. Science shows that slow, rhythmic breathing regulates the nervous system, moving the body from survival into creation. When you inhale softly, pause gently, and exhale longer than you inhale, your heart rhythm becomes ordered. Your brain waves align, and your entire system enters coherence. In that state, the signal you transmit into the field amplifies exponentially. It is not about forcing the breath but training the body to feel safe enough to express a new vibration. Just a few minutes daily can rewire the baseline of your biology. Imagination is the second key, not imagination as fantasy, but imagination as rehearsal. Neville Goddard taught that the subconscious cannot distinguish between experience lived and experience vividly imagined. Neuroscience confirms this: when you rehearse with full sensory immersion, the same neural pathways activate as if it were happening now. This is why athletes mentally perform before stepping onto the field. It prepares both brain and body for alignment. To practice collapse, you must imagine not from observation but from participation, from within the desired reality. Feel the room, sense the air, breathe the emotion of already living it. The richer the rehearsal, the deeper your body's belief, and the more stable the collapse becomes. Sleep is another gateway. The moments before sleep are when your mind enters the theta bridge to the subconscious. If you drift to sleep rehearsing lack, you reinforce it through the night. But if you rest in fulfillment, grateful, peaceful, aligned, you carry that frequency into the deepest layers of being. The subconscious echoes it like a melody, imprinting identity at the core. Night after night, you collapse either the old or the new, depending on how you surrender into sleep. But here is the incomplete puzzle: why do some practice these rituals with devotion and still feel stuck? The answer lies in contradiction. They may breathe, imagine, and rehearse, but spend the rest of the day feeding worry and hesitation. Collapse requires coherence. A few minutes of alignment cannot outweigh hours of incoherence. The field listens to your dominant vibration, not your occasional effort. The practice is not about perfection. It is about stability. If you return again and again to coherence, eventually it becomes your natural state. And when it does, collapse happens naturally. Here's the pattern interrupt you need to remember. Collapse is not about effort. It is about surrender. It is not about pushing reality, but about embodying it until reality has no choice. The practices are not steps to force the field, but tools to quiet the resistance so your true signal can shine. You are not creating something new. You are aligning with what already exists in potential. The collapse is not a fight. It is a falling into alignment. And now I want you to anchor this moment with action. In the comments, type this phrase: I collapse into my new reality. Write it not as a wish but as a declaration. See it as the first ripple of coherence you are choosing to broadcast. It may look like simple words, but in truth it is a signal to your subconscious that you are stepping into embodiment. The act of writing it out is itself a small collapse. A choice that aligns you with the reality you seek. Let's return to practice. Beyond breath, imagination, and sleep. The fourth ritual is micro-habits. Every small action that reflects your desired identity reinforces coherence. If you are collapsing into health, choose one action each day that a healthy person would take. If you are collapsing into abundance, make one decision daily from the state of abundance, even if small. These micro-habits teach your nervous system consistency. Over time, they weave the desired state into your biology, and the collapse stabilizes until it becomes unshakable. Ancient traditions always pointed toward the same truth. Yogic practices of pranayama, Buddhist meditations on compassion, Christian prayers of faith, mystical visualizations, all of them are technologies of collapse. They were never about pleasing a god or performing rituals for others. They were about aligning inner coherence with the greater field. When you practice collapse daily, you are not inventing something new. You are tapping into timeless methods humanity has always used to choose reality. So let me leave you with this curiosity loop. What happens when you stop practicing collapse only in moments of meditation and begin carrying it into every breath, every choice, every night of sleep? What happens when coherence is no longer an occasional exercise but your way of being? That is when collapse stops being something you do and becomes who you are. Every collapse begins as something invisible, internal, almost imperceptible. But once it stabilizes, its effects extend far beyond you. Like ripples moving outward from a single drop. The realities you collapse radiate into your environment, shaping events, influencing relationships, and drawing circumstances into alignment. What begins as silence becomes a wave strong enough to reorganize entire aspects of your life, even though no one else can trace its origin. This is the ripple of collapsed realities, the unseen consequence of embodying a new state until the field has no choice but to respond. Consider relationships. How many times have you tried to change someone through words, persuasion, or argument only to find them resisting even more? Yet, when you shift your own state, they often change without explanation. Collapse works like resonance. Just as a vibrating string sets another string into motion, your embodied state sends signals that others unconsciously attune to. A calm person enters a tense room and within minutes the atmosphere begins to soften. A person radiating certainty influences others to feel safe without speaking a word. These are ripples of collapse in motion. Silent, unseen, but undeniable. Physics offers the same confirmation. Energy fields affect one another without physical touch. When one system vibrates in harmony, others nearby are drawn into resonance. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields describe this as a transfer of memory patterns. And quantum mechanics illustrates it through entanglement, particles linked so that a shift in one instantly alters the other regardless of distance. When you collapse a new reality within yourself, the ripple expands into the greater field, reorganizing probabilities all around you. It is not magic. It is coherence echoing through the fabric of connection. But here lies the unfinished mystery. If collapse ripples outward, why don't people notice instantly? Why does it sometimes take weeks or months for evidence to emerge? The answer lies in unfolding. A ripple expands slowly. It begins near the source and then stretches outward, touching broader and broader edges. The first changes may be faint. Your emotions grow lighter. Your body relaxes. Subtle synchronicities occur. Then the ripple strengthens. Opportunities appear. Doors open. Relationships evolve. Finally, the wave reaches the farthest edges of your life, producing visible transformation. The delay is not proof that nothing is happening, it is proof that movement is still underway. Think of it like planting seeds in fertile soil. You cannot see the growth immediately, yet roots are forming quietly. One day, seemingly overnight, sprouts emerge. To outsiders, it looks sudden. To you, it is the natural result of invisible progress beneath the surface. The ripple of collapsed realities works the same way. By the time others notice the change, the evolution has been unfolding silently for far longer than they imagine. This explains why some seem to achieve overnight success. They were embodying coherence patiently for years. They collapsed new realities inwardly long before outer proof appeared. When the ripple finally reached critical mass, everything reorganized at once. From the outside, it feels miraculous. From the inside, it was inevitable. The ripple effect teaches us patience, not passive waiting but active trust that every coherent signal you sustain is already radiating outward. There is also a neurological dimension. Humans are wired with mirror neurons, cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you witness someone else performing it. These neurons explain why you yawn when another does, why emotions spread, and why presence alone can shift energy in a space. When you collapse into a new identity, your nervous system transmits that signal, and others unconsciously mirror it. They may never understand why they feel different near you, but they do. This is the ripple effect at the biological level. The collapse within you becomes experience for others without explanation. Here's the pattern interrupt. You don't need to persuade anyone of your transformation. You don't need to prove your collapse or defend it. The ripple speaks for you. The more you try to explain it, the more you scatter the coherence that gives it strength. Silence amplifies the signal. Quiet embodiment allows the ripple to expand without resistance. When evidence finally appears, it feels undeniable, even miraculous, yet it was always the ripple of collapse at work. Spiritual traditions affirm the same truth. The Tao teaches that real power is effortless influence, Wu Wei, action without force that still moves everything. Mystics describe transformation as a fragrance, subtle yet unmistakable, felt without words. Even scriptures advise prayer and faith in secret, because the reward lies not in being seen but in becoming. All of them understood the ripple. When you collapse quietly, reality inevitably reorganizes around you. So let this question linger as an open loop. If you are already collapsing realities and sending ripples into the field, what would change if you began collapsing with intention? What would your relationships, your prosperity, your health, your destiny look like if every ripple carried coherence instead of contradiction? The field does not choose for you. The collapse is already unfolding. The ripple is already moving. The only choice that remains is which signal you will allow it to carry. The deepest truth about manifestation is that it cannot remain something you do occasionally, it must become the way you live. Collapse is not a tool to reach for when you want something, it is the natural byproduct of identity sustained over time. When you stop treating manifestation as an event and begin living as if the desired reality is already yours, you shift from doing into being. And being is the frequency the field always responds to. Think of nature. A tree never tries to prove it is a tree. It does not announce its growth each day. It simply embodies treeness, silently, steadily, and inevitably, it produces fruit. Collapse works the same way. You do not need to force it. You only need to stabilize the state until it becomes who you are. At that point, the field no longer negotiates with your past identity, it reorganizes around your new one. The changes that arrive may seem sudden to others, but to you, they feel like the most natural unfolding in the world. Science confirms this. When neural pathways strengthen through repetition, old circuits weaken and the brain prunes away what is no longer used. Over time, your nervous system stops identifying with the past. The body stops rehearsing stress, fear, and limitation. Hormones balance, the heart synchronizes, and the electromagnetic field around you grows stronger and clearer. This is biology living as the collapse. It is not temporary, it is self-sustaining. Your entire system shifts into a new baseline, and reality conforms, because the signal you emit has become undeniable. Spiritually, this is what Neville Goddard meant by living in the end. It is not about pretending. It is not about forcing belief. It is about embodying the version of yourself who already lives the reality you desire. In that embodiment, doubt dissolves because it no longer matches your identity. Fear fades because it no longer feels relevant. The only thing left is coherence, and coherence always collapses into form. Here's the paradox. The quieter the becoming, the more permanent the change. Loud declarations often mask insecurity. Silent embodiment encodes truth. You no longer need to prove anything. You simply live as the collapse, and the field bends to match. This is why ancient wisdom spoke of humility, secrecy, and inner devotion. They knew that reality shifts most powerfully when you stop chasing and start being. But here's the curiosity loop. If collapse is inevitable, then every moment you live unconsciously is collapsing something too. Which means you are never off the hook. You are always choosing. Always collapsing. Always sending ripples into the field. So the invitation is simple, yet profound. Stop rehearsing the old story. Stop embodying the version of you who doubts. Begin living as the one who has already received, already become, already collapsed into the reality you once thought distant. And when you do, watch how quietly everything changes. Opportunities appear. Relationships shift. Health reorganizes. Finances flow. And to those watching, it will all look effortless. They will ask, how did you do it? And you will know, the answer was never in doing. It was in being. You lived as the collapse, and reality had no choice but to comply. Before we close, I want to leave you with a path forward. If you feel called to take this deeper, to move beyond theory and anchor collapse into daily rituals, I've created something for you. It's called Awaken Your Quantum Power, a complete guide that not only explains these principles but gives you the tools to live them. Inside, you'll find frameworks, exercises, and real practices that transform collapse from concept into experience. You'll find the link in the pinned comment below. Treat it not as extra information, but as the next step in the journey you've already begun, the stabilization of your becoming. Because the true secret of manifestation is not in asking, but in collapsing. Not in wishing, but in being. And when you live as the collapse, you are no longer chasing a reality. You are walking inside it, quietly, powerfully, permanently.